By 1933, every major economy had abandoned gold, not because it failed, because it worked too well. For a century, the gold standard was the spine of global finance. A nation's currency was backed by gold held in vaults. You could walk into a bank and exchange paper for metal. This wasn't faith, it was physics. The system seemed unbreakable. Economists called it monetary discipline. It forced governments to live within their means. Spend more than you earned in gold and your reserves drained. The market corrected itself. No inflation spirals. No runaway debt. The textbook explanation holds that the Great Depression shattered this system because the gold standard was too rigid, too deflationary. Governments needed flexibility to fight mass unemployment. Gold chains them to the past, so they broke free. This story is half true, and the half that's true obscures what actually happened. Start in 1929. The stock market crashed in October. Within months, unemployment in the United States climbed toward 20%. Factories closed, families lost savings, breadlines formed. The standard economic response under gold was clear. Let wages fall, let prices fall, let the excess drain out. Painful but swift. Instead, something different happened. President Hoover and later Roosevelt didn't let the market clear. They tried to prop up wages and prices artificially. They hoped to prevent the downward spiral. But here's what they didn't account for. The gold standard made this impossible to sustain. When a government spends more than it takes in, it must either borrow or print money. Under the gold standard, printing was forbidden. You couldn't create currency without backing it with gold, so governments borrowed. They issued bonds. Other nations saw American debt mounting and grew nervous. They asked the obvious question: can the United States actually pay this back? The answer under gold was verifiable. Check the vaults. How much gold backs the dollar? By 1931, foreign central banks began converting dollars to gold. They weren't being hostile. They were being rational. The gold was leaving America. By 1933, the Federal Reserve faced a choice that seemed impossible. Defend the gold standard and allow the monetary supply to collapse, deepening the depression, or abandon gold and print money to reflate the economy. The textbooks say governments chose inflation because they finally understood Keynesian economics. That's backwards. They abandoned gold because gold itself was forcing them to choose between principle and survival. Roosevelt made the decision in March 1933. The United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold at fixed rates. Domestically, citizens couldn't convert. Internationally, the door was closing. Britain had already left gold in 1931. France held on longer, but the pressure was immense. What's crucial to understand, the gold standard didn't collapse from weakness. It collapsed from strength. Because gold is real, because it can't be created by decree, it forced governments to face reality. You can't run deficits forever when your currency is backed by a finite metal. The Depression was brutal because the economy had to adjust. Debts had to be written down. Wages had to fall. The gold standard wouldn't allow the pain to be delayed or hidden. It made the bill come due immediately. Governments chose to abandon the system not because it was wrong in theory, but because it was right in practice, and reality was unbearable. Once the standard was broken, the consequences unfolded quickly. Governments could now print money. They could inflate their way out of debt. They could reduce the real burden of borrowing by making the currency worth less. This worked in the short term. Deflation stopped. Prices stabilized. Employment began to recover. But there was a cost that wouldn't be visible for decades. By severing the link between currency and gold, governments severed the link between spending and consequence. There was no longer a hard constraint on debt. A nation could borrow and print indefinitely, as long as creditors believed in its future. The gold standard's death during the Depression wasn't a triumph of economic understanding. It was a surrender to political necessity. Governments chose to abandon monetary discipline because the discipline was killing their economies and their legitimacy. The system worked exactly as designed, which was the problem. In a deflationary spiral, every delay in adjustment makes recovery harder. The gold standard couldn't accommodate gradual adjustment. It demanded it all at once. Nations couldn't bear it, so they broke the chain. What replaced it was a system based not on gold, but on trust. Trust that governments wouldn't abuse the power to print. That trust held for decades, but it was always conditional. The real lesson isn't that the gold standard was wrong or right. It's that any monetary system reflects a choice about who bears the cost of adjustment. Gold forces that cost onto the present. It prevents delay. Modern fiat currency allows delay. It lets governments spread the cost across time, across inflation, across creditors and savers. Neither is painless. The Depression revealed that gold's pain was politically intolerable. But the alternative, the freedom to print, created new risks that took decades to materialize. The system that replaced gold was more flexible. It was also more fragile in different ways. Between 1931 and 1936, every major economy abandoned the gold standard. Not in coordination, in sequence. Each nation that left gained a temporary advantage: cheaper exports, reflation, recovery. Each nation that left made it harder for others to stay. The standard wasn't overthrown by revolution. It was abandoned by necessity, one government at a time. by the end of the decade. The world had moved to a new system, currencies backed by government promise, not precious metal. This shift didn't end economic crises, it changed their nature. Without gold's constraint, governments could spend beyond their means for years. But eventually, creditors would question whether the promises were real. That question would return in different forms throughout the 20th century. The gold standard's final days weren't a story of enlightenment. They were a story of constraint meeting reality. The constraint was real, the reality was unbearable. Governments chose flexibility over discipline. They chose to trust in their own future rather than trust in gold. That choice shaped the next 80 years of economic history. It made inflation possible. It made bubbles possible. It made the kind of stimulus that defines modern policy possible. None of this could have happened under a gold standard. Whether that's a loss or a liberation depends on what you value, stability or flexibility, present discipline or future options. The Depression didn't prove the gold standard was wrong. It proved that governments would always choose survival over principle. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe. Each week we trace how the systems that shaped the past are still shaping us today. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.